Okay, here's part 3 of the video installment here for Riverside and Herbert Hoover High School. Now, there are different types of school. We were talking about East St. Louis versus Rye, New York, so you get the idea of some of the disparities there, my goodness. Now, magnet schools and charter schools, I want to talk a little bit about each of those. Magnet schools are designed to attract students from diverse social, economic, ethnic, and racial backgrounds. So the idea and the hope is to diversify populations, and they focus on a specific subject, such as science or the arts. I've been told Capitol High School is a magnet school for the performing arts, for example. They follow specific themes, such as business, technology, communications, humanities, law, and they operate according to certain models. Now, they're still accountable, just like every other public school is. They have to provide opportunities for students to learn. Test scores have to be sufficient. It's the same kind of deal there. So, now charter schools, on the other hand, are public schools that operate with the freedom from many of the local and state regulations that apply to traditional public schools. So this is basically, it's a public school, but they don't have to follow the same rules that other public schools do. As long as they can show that their test scores and that their academic results are on par or a little bit higher even than public schools, then they can maintain their charter. Charter schools are sponsored by local, state, or other organizations that monitor the quality by holding them accountable for academic results. Now, schools can lose their charters. These schools, if they don't perform up to par, or if they don't produce test scores that are sufficient, then these schools can dissolve. They'll lose their charter. So they have to hold up to the standard, if you will. As of 2004, there were 40 states and Washington, D.C. that had charter school laws. Nationally, there are about 3,000 charter schools that serve over 750,000 students. Now, there's lots of arguments for and against school choice competition, especially in cities. A lot of parents have been crying for years that schools in inner cities just aren't preparing their children adequately for some of the reasons we've already talked about. You've got crime, you've got poverty, you've got good teachers not wanting to teach there, buildings falling apart. Just not a good situation. So maybe if you introduce the idea of competition, it'll make all the schools better. So maybe it could lead to improvement. Maybe competition can help to improve minority inter-school conditions. Also, it could help to improve minority school performance. Others, like Mr. Iglesias, argues that school choice provides really very little benefit over public schools. It provides an opportunity for public money to be used to forward religious agendas. So a lot of schools of choice, if you have a child who's not performing very well in a decaying inner-city public school, if I now decide to send my child to a different school, maybe like a Catholic school, for example, Rutrow, somebody's going to be upset because now taxpayer dollars are being used to send this child to a religious school. So you make the argument that, well, now we're using taxpayer dollars to forward religious agendas in schools, and that's not what we're supposed to do, separation of church and state. Some would argue that this further segregates schools racially and ethnically. School choice, essentially what you would have would be the better schools would cherry pick the kids that they wanted, the ones that were performing the best, and those are generally the white kids. Not because white students are smarter, but it's for the sociological reasons that we've been talking about. So it would just further segregate these schools racially, according to some like Iglesias. Coleman argues that research illustrates that both religious and private schools succeed in educating minority, poor urban students in areas where public schools were and are failing. So there's some research that suggests that, regardless of your religious beliefs or lack thereof, they, along with private schools, are doing a better job at getting stuff and educating more efficiently these poor urban students. So that's really what counts at the end of the day, according to Coleman. Others like Peterson have studied school choice in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Dayton, Ohio, and they discovered that for these school choice low-income urban students in all three areas, there was virtually no difference between the academic achievement of these students compared to their urban counterparts in just normal decaying public schools. So some research says, you get better outcomes when you let the kids go to different schools. Other research says, no, there's really not that much of a difference at all. So We are quick to make internal attributions as opposed to external attributions. What do I mean by that? Well, most people, when you ask them in this country, feel that the United States is failing when it comes to public schools. We're failing our children, especially in inner cities. Now, there's an internal and an external focus here. Internal attributions tend to blame the school system, the kids, and the teachers. So we could look at East St. Louis, Illinois again, those images you just saw, and we could think about these kids and think, well, it's their fault. They're not doing well. They're lazy. They're not taking the initiative. They're not doing well on their tests because they don't take it seriously. They're more worried about other things. The teachers suck, or the school system, just nobody cares. It's just the teachers, the principals don't care. Let's blame let's blame the students. Let's blame the teachers. In some cases, you can do that, but in most cases, in inner cities especially, you really can't. Maybe it's more appropriate to look at it at an external focus here, or attribution. External attribution blames the environment. I would submit to you, and I might be wrong, but I would submit to you a personal opinion that if you took the high-achieving kids that were in Rye, New York, at that really wonderful-looking school with the nice carpet and the wood paneling and the $1 million donations and the computers and the state-of-the-art equipment, and you transplanted them into the decaying inner-city public schools of East St. Louis, Illinois, and start first grade, and you take the poor black kids and put them at Rye, New York, I would bet you that those outcomes would turn out very differently for those kids. I would bet that the white kids in the inner city in those schools would not do nearly as well because the opportunities aren't there. And I would submit that the minority kids, the black kids who are now in Rye, New York, in this public school system would do a lot better because they now have all the opportunities in the world in front of them. So that would make the external argument here. And we're going to transition into the next part of this here. So this will just take a second. So we're going to continue now talking about some of these issues that occur in inner cities. We're going to move away from education and start looking at poverty and crime. Now, oops, I better adjust my camera a little bit so I can capture all this here. Sorry about that. There we go. My bad. Okay. Now, crime in the U.S. cities. There have been lots of surveys that have been conducted showing that often people point to the following as the primary reason they choose not to live in U.S. cities: fears of personal safety. That's really the big one. They also indicate people who do live in cities just kind of conclude that the high risk of crime is a trade-off for the advantages of living in cities or urban areas. So there is this fear that when you're in cities, you're going to be mugged, you're going to be raped, you're going to be robbed, and those things can happen. But those things can happen in the suburbs and also in rural areas as well. So we'll talk more about that as we go. Some images of crime in urban areas for you here. I don't know if you're able to see that a whole lot, but I'll talk about it briefly. Detroit, Michigan is America's most dangerous city according to most research. Oakland, California, and St. Louis, Missouri, those round up the top three. And consistently in all the research I've seen, those cities always kind of take the top three positions. The violent crime rate per 100,000 residents in these U.S. cities in 2013, Detroit, Michigan, 2,123, if you can see that. In Oakland, California, it was just under 2,000. And in St. Louis, Missouri, it was 1,777. So that's violent crimes per 100,000 people. That's a lot. And then you can see some of the other honorable mentions here: Memphis, Stockton, Birmingham, Alabama, Baltimore, Maryland, Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the very bottom. Adjusting my camera yet again here. For the fifth year running, Detroit tops the Forbes list of the most dangerous cities in the U.S. Even though violent crime actually fell in Detroit last year, it still experienced 386 murders. The overall violent crime rate in this city stands at 2,123 per 100,000 residents. That's a lot. Oakland, California, second on the list we just talked about. Since 1993, the rate of violent crime has risen 16%. St. Louis, Missouri, we can see that as well. 1,777 instances of violent crime per 100,000 residents. Some images of Detroit, Michigan. Again, Detroit is often stated to be the most dangerous city in the United States. The Motor City has the highest crime rate among cities with 250,000 people or more residents. So I'll give you some images of Detroit before we call this the end of part 3 here. So you can see the welcome to Detroit, the Renaissance city, and all the nastiness around it. Now granted, these are biased images of Detroit. There are nicer parts of Detroit and nicer images of Detroit even now, even though the city has been ravaged economically and socially. Here's some images of Oakland, California, which was second on the list, and then St. Louis, Missouri, which was third on the list. And a surprise, overall, Kansas City in Missouri. There's an image of Kansas City. Its violent crime rate is the 9th highest among big cities, and aggravated assaults are very prominent among Kansas City's police reports. So we're going to stop that here for this part. Thanks.